Hi friends, welcome back to Ferrigno Freedom channel, and for those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. My name is Dante Ferrigno. I have been doing a version of the carnivore diet known as the lion diet now for a little over 3.5 years, and it has just changed things in my life that I never thought changing the way I eat would change. It has changed me physically, mentally, and spiritually, and it has just been amazing. But if you want to know more about my background on that, go back and check out my first video, 125 Days on Lion Diet. And there you'll see kind of where I started this journey. It was basically just a desperate attempt to find a way to get healthy, and it has worked. And ever since then, I have become the world's biggest advocate for helping people get healthy, helping people to realize that something as crazy sounding as a carnivore way of eating is that may be exactly what you've been looking for your whole life, is the very thing that doctors for many years were telling me that these are the things to avoid. It turned out they were the things to actually consume if you wanted to be healthy. And it's like we all knew that the food system was full of junk food, but it's like it has gotten to the point where junk food is the norm, so much more so than it was in the past, that we don't realize how far our food has gone over the rails on being healthy for us. So I've been very interested in this Make America Healthy Again notion that has come up since RFK Jr. joined up with Donald Trump on his road to the White House, because nobody was really talking about the importance of this on the national scale until I heard Callie and Casey Means talking about it, and I did a whole reaction to their video with Tucker Carlson on this. And I wanted to pay closer attention to what RFK Jr. was saying, because normally RFK Jr. would have been somebody that might not have been on my radar. But when I hear somebody making sense, I will take a look and see what they got going on. The thing I worry about when it comes to healthcare and lawmaking is I'm not a big fan of banning things or using force to get the food the way you want it to be, because the same thing happens when you use force and everything else. Is one, that force can be used by the wrong people when somebody else is in power, and two, that force can be used in such a way that you lose your freedom to actually learn anything new. And I don't think either way is a good result. So what I'm hoping it's going to do is I'm hoping that these plans that they have are going to address the subsidization of foods that are being made that are not good for us, basically. The way to deal with lies that are basically told by the companies who make these food products and tell us that they're perfectly healthy, that they actually promote things like heart health and such, when they are the exact opposite. And when you use their ingredients in the human body and you take a look at tests over long periods of time, you can see that this ultra-processed garbage is leading us down a very bad path, where we have examples of people having more cancer than ever before, more examples of diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and the list goes on and on. Dementia and Alzheimer's is on the rise. And it seems to all coincide with the way our food companies have been taken over by the cigarette companies back in the 1980s. And when we started following guidelines that the government was representing that had us eating a lot more grains and a lot more seed oils. And it turns out those things are actually not healthy for us. So I want to see where RFK is going with his plans on what he wants to do about these bad food actors that are out there. Because I think there's a good way to address the problem and there's a not so good way to address the problem. And I really want to get familiar with what his way is, so we're going to take a look at that now. This is a few segments from a video that he did with Jordan Peterson called The Great Partisan Shift. And it was episode 484 on the Jordan B. Peterson YouTube channel. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that video up right now, and let's take a look at it. It's been queued up to the segment that I wanted to watch.
And I would also argue the Republican Party is now the party of true environmentalists. The fixation that, and this is the space that I came out of, and I got into, environmental work. I'm working for commercial fishermen on the Hudson River and then rivers all over the country, protecting habitat, protecting water, clean air, protecting our children against toxins. And it's endocrine disruptors. There's a chemical now, the second most used chemical in this country, a pesticide in this country, is atrazine. It's banned in Europe, banned all over the world, but we use it here. It's in 63% of our drinking water. There's a famous African-American scientist named Tyler Hayes, who's at the University of Berkeley. He did a famous experiment that anybody can look up on the internet. And he put 70 African water frogs in an aquarium. He put atrazine in the water of that aquarium that was less than EPA's level. So it's less than the levels we have in 63% of our water supply. 60 of those frogs became sterile. They're all male frogs. 60 became sterile. 10% of those frogs turned female, and they were able to produce fertile eggs. So it changed their sex. And of course, normally, when you see something like that in an animal model, the first thing you want to do is test it in a mammalian model and a human model. Those tests were never done. So we don't know what impact it's having on our children, if any. But I think those studies ought to be done.
That's a good point. Those studies should be done. I want to take a closer look at that too.
Hey, it's Dante Ferrigno. I just wanted to thank you first of all for watching this video, but I also wanted to tell you about my merch shop. I have a link in the description for a bunch of different items I've put together for you to be able to show your support for the carnivore lifestyle, and every purchase helps me to keep doing what I'm doing here on Ferrigno Freedom.
All right, I found this website here on UC Berkeley News, which cites the guy that RFK just mentioned, Tyrone Hayes. The herbicide atrazine, one of the world's most widely used pesticides, screws up the sex life of adult male frogs, emasculating 3/4 of them and turning 1 in 10 into females, according to a new study by UC Berkeley's Tyrone Hayes. This was in March 2010. All right, so this section here was kind of interesting. The 10% or more that turn from males into females, something not known to occur under natural conditions in amphibians, can successfully mate with male frogs, but because these females are genetically male, all of their offspring are male. When we grow these guys up, depending on the family, we will get anywhere from 10 to 50% females, Hayes said. In a population, the genetically male females can decrease or wipe out a population just because they skew the sex ratios so badly. Though the experiments were performed on a common laboratory frog, the African clawed frog, field studies indicate that atrazine, a potent endocrine disruptor, similarly affects frogs in the wild and could possibly be one of the causes of amphibian declines around the globe, Hayes said. See, I didn't even think about what it would be doing to the actual amphibian population when they mentioned that. I was just thinking about the ramifications of changing in the hormones of these animals, as it might relate to humans. But then to think about what it could do to the frog population, everything is in a balance. We're definitely wreaking havoc on that balance when it comes to having things like this getting used every day out in the field. This next area here says these kinds of problems like sex-reversing animals skewing sex ratios are much more dangerous than any chemical that would kill off a population of frogs, he said. In exposed populations, it looks like there are frogs breeding, but in fact the population is being very slowly degraded by the introduction of these altered animals. Some 80 million pounds of herbicide atrazine are applied annually in the United States on corn and sorghum to control weeds and increase crop yield. But such widespread use also makes atrazine the most common pesticide contaminant of ground and surface water, according to various studies. Well, that ought to say everything you need to know right there. How it's affecting these animals ought to indicate that we need to know more about how atrazine affects mammals as well. There's a conflict of interest that's created whenever the party who provides the test is also the party who needs the results of the test to make a profit from. So that's real interesting. I didn't even know anything about the atrazine situation in our water.
Transformation not only of the Republicans in the way you said, but also in the team that's gathered around Trump himself. And so, I'm curious what you think about Trump per se. You've met with him many times now, and you guys have obviously cobbled together something approximating a functional agreement. He obviously listened to you on the health front, but then there's these other people that are surrounding him at the moment too that seem to be, they remind me in some ways of you. They're not the typical political players. They're much more entrepreneurial. They're certainly not classic Republicans. And so how are things going with you and Trump? You said a bunch of things about the Democrats that were critical, but you haven't yet elucidated your opinions with regards to Trump and the team that's around him now. So I'm curious about your sentiments in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I had, multiple discussions. I got a call from about 2 hours after President Trump's shooting in Butler. I got a call from a guy called Callie Means, who is really a genius who's been on the forefront of reforming our food system and, dealing with the chronic disease epidemic. He and his sister, Casey Means, who did this wonderful interview with Tucker that, introduced a lot of people to them. He called me and he said to me, are you interested in talking to the Trump team about, some kind of a partnership about perhaps unifying your parties? And he, and I said no immediately. And then I actually called my family members and talked to, a number of my immediate family members. And they said, you should talk to him. My wife said, you should talk to him, but she was not thinking about unifying the party. She was just thinking that he had just been shot, and that, because I came from a background where my uncle, my father were killed by assassins, that it would be a compassionate thing to talk to him. But my kids were, you should talk to him about hearing him out on what he has in mind. And so I then sent Callie Means a text saying, I'm interested. And then a few minutes later, I got a text a three-way text from Tucker Carlson with an unknown number that was President Trump's cell phone. And he said, will you guys talk? And then I said yes. And a few minutes later, I got a call from President Trump. And we talked probably for 30 or 35 minutes. And we talked about a whole lot of issues, different issues, and, about his shooting.
Before he goes into detail on everything that they talked about, I just want to point out that I had commented once on Facebook how seeing RFK Jr. come and join Trump is one of the, if not the most amazing thing I have ever witnessed in politics, because I have watched politics fairly closely my entire life, and I thought I was pretty adept at seeing things. And one of the things I was always able to see was the fact that nobody ever could seem to see past their differences with somebody and join together for things that we do agree on. It's like there was always resistance because of ego or pride or something that would get in the way. Or maybe it was just the standard practice, as he mentioned when he was approached about coming together. He initially said no. I mean, that was like just straight up no. That's not something that's done. That's why I thought it was amazing. And I'm glad to hear that it came about the way that it did, because something that was definitely used to be evil against what Trump was trying to do has now been turned into a positive. The attempt on his life not only gave him the ability to show what strength he has when he was able to stand up and let us know that he was not giving up, but then also to find out that somebody who was resistant to coming around and working together with him decided to take a different approach simply because of a big incident like that. I think that's very interesting, that something that's real like that can reach in and change the normal mode of politics, the way they normally go. And that's what we need if we're going to have any type of movement in the right direction on the political scene. And I'm skeptical as to how much the political scene can change anything. Don't get me wrong. I'm not putting all my eggs in this basket. But I am interested to hear what's happening, because it's the first time somebody that seems to make any sense is talking about health and politics. So let's continue on with this part of it. Okay, Sam.
About the issues that I was interested in. And he expressed a kind of at that point, which was a conformance with me on some of that, alignment with me on some of those issues. And we agreed to meet the next day, and we ended up meeting in Milwaukee, and we had, I think, probably about 2.5 hours together. And at that point, we talked about the food system. We talked about the chronic disease epidemic. We talked about the neocons and the addiction to war. And I was impressed by his just, I would say, visceral revulsion about the neocons and about their view of an imperium abroad and a national security state at home, which go hand in hand because imperialism abroad is inconsistent with democracy at home. And with also his abhorrence for censorship, which he was, again, it was visceral with him. And I think part of that is because he's seen it in action. You know, he's been the target of censorship the same as I have. And so then we agreed that maybe there was grounds to meet on. They wanted me to do something at the convention, the Republican convention, and I was not ready to do anything. And then,
so these are some good issues that they were able to proceed on, agreeing on the health issue, agreeing on censorship. These things are definitely cornerstones to our republic staying functional, in my opinion. So to see two sides that don't necessarily agree on everything coming together to fight for those core values is very exciting for me. And especially since it's getting on board with something that I've been trying to do with my channel for the past 3 years, and that's encourage people that they can get healthy, and it's a lot easier than they thought. Yes, there's going to be struggles with it. There is struggles with anything in life, but at the same time, you can overcome things you thought you couldn't overcome when you stop eating the garbage that's in the food supply that we have. And I talk about that a lot in other videos, but getting that ultra-processed food and seed oils and sugar out of your life is going to make such a big difference. And then if you're putting food in your body that feeds it everything it needs, like I have found that an all-meat diet does, like the Lion diet, it has just simply been amazing. And I want other people to have that. So I'm glad to see that somebody is jumping on board to talk about the importance of our health. Let me skip up a little further here and find a segment that I had flagged as being important to take a look at with you.
To involve me in some way in helping to choose the new government and helping to give emphasis to the policies that I was concerned about. And the 3 policies were children's health and the chronic disease epidemic, and which involves the food system and getting the corruption out of the public health agencies and out of USDA. Second, to ending the censorship and surveillance. And number 3, ending the warfare state, ending the Ukraine war immediately.
So that's good that he's highlighting that. And I don't know if he's naming it as his top priority, but he listed it first on his list of 3. And the key is that he's not talking about making healthcare better, which has been the problem, is government getting involved in healthcare to begin with, but undoing the corruption that has run rampant. And he sees how the medical system and the healthcare system and the government system that works between those two is causing the problem. So I'm hoping there's going to be some answers that really address those issues, that undo the problems that are put into place by taking a look at how certain laws actually exacerbate the problem. So hopefully getting to the point where government is getting out of the way rather than trying to manipulate the process to let the market work the way it's supposed to. We'll see food companies that lie to you about what they're selling you are going to be suffering from the penalties of getting people sick, because the testing will be there to show that these foods that they're saying are heart healthy or whatnot are actually causing the heart problems that people are having. And then those companies will get sued into non-existence. I mean, the only way we're really going to be able to do anything that's going to address this problem without adding more government to the situation is to make the laws address the truthfulness of what you're told by a company when it comes to nutrition or health or anything that's important. I mean, if the buying of life insurance is as regulated as it is to make sure that people aren't being deceived or getting bad products, there should be something put into place that's going to encourage the truth to be told within these other industries. countries. But right now, lying is what is encouraged. They can talk about in the commercials all the things about food that are supposedly true because the studies that have been financed for the use of promoting these products is done by the companies who are selling the products. So it's all lies that we're being told. All this stuff that we're being told about the food pyramid and the guidelines for food, everything is the opposite of what it should be that we've been told about nutrition. And until that gets addressed, there's not going to be any legal ramifications for the things that they're doing. Okay, so let's see this last little segment here where they talked about obesity in children. The Carnivore bar compared to movie theater snack prices, it's no competition. With a tub of popcorn running you over $14, I'd much rather enjoy the salty, crunchy, meaty goodness of a Carnivore bar any day. And I don't have to cheat to enjoy my night out. Carnivore bar. Save 10 to 20% when you use my link in the description of this video.
You laid out 3 policy areas where you felt that you could work with President Trump very effectively: health, speech, and peace. And we've spent a fair bit of time concentrating on free speech and on peace and war. And I think we'll turn to that more, the peace and war issue, on the Daily Wire side in the conclusion of our interview. But maybe we could close up, if you don't mind, with some more thoughts on the health crisis. Because one of the things you've done that I think is unprecedented, and that's become perhaps more part of the public discussion since you've teamed up with Trump, is to make public health a political issue. And so you talked about the public health crisis, and maybe you could lay out the dimensions of that crisis. I mean, I know there's an obesity epidemic, there's a diabetes epidemic. These are very, very serious problems. And so, but you've concentrated on that in a way that just isn't characteristic of anybody on the political landscape at all. And now it's become an issue that's front and center. And so I'd like to hear more about your thoughts, why you think that's such a fundamental priority, compared to, say, free speech and war and peace. Why health? And what you see, lay out the landscape of the problem and also the landscape of potential solution.
Yeah, so we are now the sickest country in the world. We have the highest chronic disease burden in the world. When my uncle was president, I was a 10-year-old boy. About 6% of Americans had chronic illness, and today 60%. When my uncle was president, we spent zero in this country on chronic disease, zero. And today, and for many chronic diseases, first of all, there weren't even diagnoses and there weren't drugs available. Today, we spend $4.3 trillion, so about 95% of our health budget. It's the biggest, and it's 5 times our military costs. It's the biggest item in our budget, and it is the fastest growing. And not only that, so it's destroying our country economically, absolutely debilitating it. All of our other issues are small towards it if you just measure its economic impact.
Yeah.
It has other impacts. 77% of American children are no longer eligible for the military because of chronic disease.
And is that obesity related with kids?
Obesity is one of them. Obesity when my uncle was president was 3.4%. Today it's 74%.
And what do you think is driving the obesity epidemic? It's such a transformation.
Yeah, I mean, it's being driven by poison food, by ultra processed wheat, sugar, and flour, seed oils, soy, canola, sunflower, and then wheat and corn, which are all heavily subsidized. So those 90% of farm subsidies, the crop insurance, et cetera, go to those 3 categories of soy, corn, and wheat. And those are the feedstocks for all of our processed foods. They turn into sugar. They're all nutrient barren. The original crops were nutrient rich, but the GMO crops are nutrient barren, and they're heavily dependent on pesticides. The point of the reason GMOs are so popular is because they're resistant to pests. The reason they're resistant to pests is because they are resistant to pesticides. like glyphosate, so you can saturate the whole landscape with glyphosate from airplanes, and that the only thing that's green is GMO corn, which is Roundup ready. It's called Roundup resistant corn, and because of that, it's also very heavily laden with pesticides. Wheat. Glyphosate is also used as a desiccant, which means it dries out wheat, so it's sprayed on the wheat right at harvest, which means it's going right into the food. And when that began in 1993, that's when you saw all the appearance of all these gluten allergies and celiac disease and wheat allergies that you don't have in Europe. You know, you can eat spaghetti here and you're going to get eczema and all of these stomach complaints. Then you go to Italy and you eat it and you get thin. But here, and then the core.
You know, I nodded at that because it's funny he mentioned you go to Italy and you get thin. It's not that I got thin. I was only in Italy for 2 weeks back in 2006, I think it was. Yeah, September of 2006. And when I got back after spending 2 weeks in Italy, one of the first things I noticed is how bad our food tasted over here. I tried going to an Italian restaurant, I don't remember which, and then I went also to an Olive Garden to try to get something like what I'd gotten used to eating while I was in Italy, because the one thing I was surprised about is how much I loved the food over there. Even like street vendor food tasted amazing compared to the food here. But then when I got back, I would try to even get something nice like, well, I mean, nice to me was Olive Garden. I know a lot of people don't think much of Olive Garden, but I mean, that was as good as I could afford. And I went out and got some of that and thought, nope, this doesn't taste anything like what they have in Italy. And I just thought it was, you know, maybe something about, I don't know. I just knew there was something wrong with the way we were doing our food here. And I couldn't put my finger on I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't have an audience I could talk to about that. I just remember thinking, man, it's weird how I feel like I get sick from coming back to the United States. So I can definitely relate to what he's talking about there.
Corn has turned into high fructose corn syrup, which is just a formula for making you obese and diabetic. And and Americans, you know, diabetes is one of the diseases. When I was a kid, the average pediatrician saw one case of diabetes in his lifetime. So a 40 or 50-year career, he may see one case of juvenile diabetes. And today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic.
That's unbelievable.
And we spend more on diabetes than our military budget. So that is, you know, and nobody's talking about this.
Yeah, right.
You know, these are all of these autoimmune disease, diabetes, autoimmune disease, Alzheimer's is a form of diabetes. It's type 3 diabetes. It comes from poison food.
So is it how much of it do you think is the toxin load per se, and how much of it do you think is carbohydrate?
It's the overload of sugars, because all of those grains turn into sucrose, and they're very low in nutrients. So we're malnourishing kids. You know, you're seeing high levels of obesity, and in the same people who have high levels of obesity, there's also high levels of malnutrition. The most malnourished people in this country are the most overweight,
right?
Because they're eating food like
food like substances. Yeah.
And then
that's a good phrase.
And then they're covered with chemicals and pesticides. But some of those are part of the food processing, but some of them are pesticides, etc. There's 1,000 ingredients in our food that are illegal in Europe and other countries. So we're just mass poisoning us, and nobody has chronic disease epidemic like we do in our country. That's why one of the reasons we had the highest death rate from COVID. We had 16% of the COVID deaths in this country. We only have 4.2% of the world's population. And so we did worse than any other country. And the CDC explains that, says it's not our fault. It's because Americans are so sick. CDC said the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases.
Right.
So it wasn't COVID, it was killing them. It was chronic disease, right? And you know, we have the sickest, we have the highest chronic disease burden, we have the highest COVID death rate. But it's not just, it's those autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile diabetes, lupus, Crohn's disease, all this IBS. All of these things had suddenly appeared in the mid-'80s. That I never knew anybody with any of those diseases when I was a kid.
Yeah, right.
The neurological diseases, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, sleep disorders, Tourette syndrome, ASD, autism rates.
Wow.
In my generation, 70-year-old men is about between 1 in 1,500 and 1 in 10,000. That's what it is today. My children's generation is 1 in every 34 kids, according to CDC, 1 in every 22 in California. So, and it is devastating. Our generation, it's our economy. It's going to cause autism alone.
So
There's a recent paper by Mark Blaxell that shows it'll cost $1 trillion a year by 2030. And then the allergic disease again, which I never saw as a kid. I had 11 siblings, 70 first cousins. I never knew anybody with a peanut allergy. Mm-hmm. I do 5, but my 7 kids have allergies. It's
So you're up against some major forces in fighting that particular battle. I mean, first of all, you have to sway public opinion in that direction, and then there's going to be a massive force arrayed against any possible interventions, that's for sure. So tell me what you think you could do, and also tell me why you don't think you would be stopped.
All right, this is really what I want to hear, is what his solutions are for this. I'm sorry to pause it right there, but I did want to pause for a minute just to address the things that he just said. It's like it's mind-blowing to me, even though I take a look at this stuff all the time, and I keep battling with people trying to help them understand why I don't want any of that stuff in my household. I don't want it around my family. If I can try to keep them away from these poisonous things that I read on the ingredients labels, that it's going to help them to always be fighting with that, but a little bit is okay. No, it's not. That's the problem, is that we can't spend money on stuff that's going to lead us in the wrong direction. We can't keep voting with our money to say that I want more of this. When you give your money to these companies who make these food-like products that are not food at all, but look like food on the box and advertise themselves as being food, then you're telling these companies that you want them to lie to you about this stuff. It really makes it hard when you feel like you're constantly battling with people about things that should be obvious. Once the glasses are taken off, once they've taken the red pill and left the matrix, it's easy to see. But if you haven't left the matrix, if you're still living in the matrix of the food situation that we have right now, it's really hard to see this problem because you just don't want to accept the truth. But once you've taken the plunge like I did, going on a carnivore way of eating, and it's changed my life like it has, I can't unsee that truth now. And that's why I'm here to share it with you and try to encourage you that you can get your health back, and that we do need people like what RFK is doing right here to be fighting for our rights within this health situation. Because right now we're being told by the powers that be to eat all the things that make us unhealthy. And then that supports not only big food, but that supports big pharma, because now you got all these people who need all these chronic diseases dealt with that they don't have any solutions for, but they got plenty of medications to keep you medicated on. And then on top of all that, how much it costs the American taxpayer compared to the defense budget. He was talking about how the cost to deal with diabetes is going to surpass, or has already surpassed, the defense budget. And the American defense budget is the largest defense budget there is out there. So the fact that we're even close on just one disease ought to say something about how far off the rails we are. People have got to get it through their head. This stuff in the grocery store that is in a package that claims to be food, these things are not food. And what he just asked about, what Jordan just asked RFK about, was how are you going to overcome this and what are you going to do about it? So let's get into that and we'll wrap this up.
Earth powder is bentonite clay, non-GMO xylitol, sea salt, peppermint essential oil, and menthol. I just want to say that earth powder has become my favorite toothpaste, and since it's made by the same company that I buy my favorite salt from, Redmond, I can definitely recommend it to you too. So if you're looking for something that's great for keeping your teeth clean and not full of all kind of chemicals and fluoride and stuff that you don't need in your body, check out Earth Powder at redmond.life, and you can use my discount code Dante, D-A-N-T-E, to save 15% on your order.
Well, I think they're going to try to stop us, but I've been thinking about this for 40 years, so I know how to do it. And you know, I've worked with Mark Hyman and Kelly Means and Casey Means and a lot of other people to figure out how to do it without having to go to Congress, to do it all with executive orders and policy changes. And, you know, I'll give you one example. I mean, you can get fluoride out of the water by executive order, out of the water systems all over the country. And that is, you know, that's a big issue with public health and cancer, et cetera. But there are other things like, it would be very hard. You never get congressional approval to ban glyphosate, which is causing all kinds of health problems and cancers all over this country. And so, but here's what you can do. You can, NIH has a budget of $42 billion a year, and it distributes that money to 56,000 scientists who are at research centers, mainly universities in North America, and, you know, Canada, the United States, and some in Europe. And they're supposed to be doing basic science, but what they really do nowadays is they do drug development for the pharmaceutical industry. So NIH is now the primary incubator for new pharmaceutical drugs. And it changed that rule, that changed. NIH used to be the primary scientific agency in the world. It changed, that changed in 1980 because we passed a bill called the Bayh-Dole Act that allowed NIH itself and NIH scientists to collect royalties on any pharmaceutical product that they developed. So now that they follow the money, and now what NIH does is they're in a partnership with pharma. They develop new products to treat chronic disease, and anybody who tries to study the etiology, the origins, the causes of chronic disease, that scientist will be blackballed forever. And so what I'm going to do, is change NIH and say we're going to make the primary purpose of this agency to develop science on what's causing chronic disease. Right now, there's very little science that says high fructose corn syrup causes diabetes. That's deliberate. We don't have that science because the agency does not want to see that science.
All right.
I'm going to make sure that science happens. Not one study, but not just 20 studies, but 100 studies that show that. Now, what happens when you have 100 studies? There is a rule in the federal courts in this country called the Daubert rule. And that says that if you believe you got sickened by a product, like say you think Coca-Cola made you obese, you can't sue Coca-Cola unless there's at least a critical mass of studies, maybe 20 or 30, that say that that's what it does.
So it's a liability enhancer.
Well, the judge has to make that decision about whether you've passed the Daubert threshold before he allows you to go to a jury. Oh, in a big case like when I was tried the Monsanto case, I was part of the trial team. The big threshold is, can you pass Daubert? And we had about 20 studies that showed that Monsanto, that Roundup caused non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And we had mouse studies, we had rat studies, we had animal studies, bench studies, observational studies, epidemiological studies, so a good range of all different kinds of studies that show that once you get that critical mass, then you can go to a jury. And once that happens, the product is through. So when we sued Roundup, we had 40,000 home gardeners who had gotten non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from using Roundup in their backyards. And the way that you try multi-district litigation, you try one of those cases at a time, right, and one after the other in rapid fire, till somebody says, uncle. You either lose them all, and then, it's you run out of money because it costs a lot of money to try a case, or you win them all, and the maker of that product then has to come to the negotiating table and settle it. We won $289 million in the first trial. We won $89 million in the second. The third trial, we asked for $1 billion, and we got $2.2 billion from the jury.
Wow.
And then Monsanto came to the negotiating table, and we settled the cases for $13 billion, and they agreed to take Roundup, to take glyphosate out of home gardening products.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what you do.
Got it.
Once enough science is out there, you don't have to legislate it against high fructose corn syrup. The lawyers are going to come out of the woodwork.
Okay.
And they're going to be representing 1 million kids with diabetes. And the company is going to say, we're not going to make this product anymore.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. That you're approaching it from the aspect of, is this harmful what you're doing? Is this thing that you are selling that is harmful to people, something you're suggesting is helpful to people, something that's going to help them be healthier is actually making them unhealthier? Oh, well, that's misleading and that's lying, and you should have to pay for that. Now, whether or not that, like those payouts that he mentioned, as big as they were, even though it was $2.1 or $2.9 billion on one of those settlements, and then he had another one they followed up with that was $13 billion, I think. But the point is depends on how much they made on the lies that they made. If they made $200 billion on something where they only had to pay $13 billion in penalties, then that's just a cost of doing business. So I'm glad to hear that that's his approach. He's not taking a full-on ban approach. And I think that's the right approach to have. Well, that's just what I think. I'd love to know what you think. And if you think that this might be useful information to somebody in your inner circle, then please share this video with your friends. Let them know that we can get healthy, that there are solutions out there, and you don't have to do anything weird. You can just eat the natural human diet that humans have eaten for thousands of years. If you want to support the channel, one of the best ways is to buy some of my merch out of the merch shop link that's down in the description, or you could check out some of my sponsors on this channel. Anyway, I appreciate you guys being here, and I will see you next time.
If we pay extra, could we maybe get some grease or fat?